welcome to Globespan 24/7 as we bring you our Monday night program from New York, from Guyana, and of course broadcast around the world. We want to thank Nohar Singh for making this platform available, and of course Devin Bisu, our technical specialist. We want to thank our sponsors for keeping their sponsorship with us so that we can continue the program, and also we want to thank you, the audience, for being a part of our program every Monday night. Tonight, we are very honored and privileged to have an outstanding son of Guyana. We have had many outstanding sons and daughters of our country, but tonight I believe we do have an extraordinary one, and we will go through that later on in our program, so you will see exactly what I mean. So it is my honor and pleasure to welcome to the program tonight Ambassador Bayney Karran. Ambassador, welcome.
Thank you. Good evening, gentlemen, and good evening to your viewers.
And of course, Dr. Rose, my co-host, welcome.
Thank you, Charles, and I let the audience know you're listening to the Pulse of the People, Globespan Television, independent, unbiased, and to the point.
Thank you. Ambassador Karran, I don't want to miss anything out of your accomplishment, but you're one of Guyana's finest sons, and your accomplishment, very, very little, if any, can match. I know you're a Queen's College alumni, you studied law, you work in Guyana in your legal practice, a very successful practice. Then Dr. Jagan selected you to be ambassador to Venezuela, and the rest is history. You became the ambassador to Venezuela and then to some South American countries. You also was ambassador to the United States, ambassador to China and to Pakistan. You were part of the OAS, and you became the Assistant Secretary General of the OAS in your stint as well. So what am I leaving out in this huge accomplishment for a distinguished son?
Well, you haven't left out anything really, but you've added something. I was never the Assistant Secretary General of the OAS. I was a candidate for election to that post, but Guyana was not successful in that venture. We lost the election to Belize. But in addition to being a lawyer and a diplomat, I was also a broadcaster before I was a lawyer. So I did some announcing on radio, and also served in an executive capacity as chairman of the board of directors of State Radio at one time, very long time ago.
And we can hear that radio voice still in you. You have not lost that special touch. Ambassador, when in Guyana, we know, and around the Caribbean as well and around the world, there are ambassadors who are career diplomats, and there are ambassadors who are appointed, political appointments. When you started your career as an ambassador, were you a career diplomat or a political appointee then?
No, I was a political appointee. A career diplomat is someone who has started out in the foreign ministry and climbed the rungs. The title of ambassador is, there's a structure and a ranking system within foreign policy establishments. So when one has worked through the system, and you go from third secretary and up the ranks to first secretary, counselor, and so on. Eventually, if you get that far in your career, then you make it to the rank of ambassador. And ambassador is a title. It's not necessarily someone who is posted abroad. There are many ambassadors who work in their home countries. Some are never posted. Some are posted in return. But then you can also be politically appointed, as I was in 1997. And how that works is, the government of the day sees the need to have someone who is not a career diplomat. And many countries, different countries have different ways of doing this. In the United States, for example, there are certain positions that are in the diplomatic service that are reserved for the political appointee. For example, the US ambassador to England, France, and one or two other places are always politically appointed. Quite often, it's someone who has donated heavily to the winning political party. At one time in Venezuela, there was a system where I think it was enshrined in the law that that the president could not appoint more than a certain percentage of political appointees. I think the figure was 50-50. But just to show that there are countries that do this in a sort of a regulated way, but it's a very common thing. And I should say that you know, there are pros and cons to both. Whether a diplomat is politically appointed or is a career diplomat, there are strengths and weaknesses to both sides. A career diplomat is someone who is very steeped in the procedures. He tends to, you know, be more strict in observing the, you know, things like the rules of engagement, the rules of protocol, and so on. A political appointee, on the other hand, has certain facilities. First of all, the receiving government would know that this is someone that the sending state, in whom the sending state has a great deal of trust. They would know that he or she probably has a line direct to the top. They would expect that he would be able to cut through the bureaucracy to get things done, perhaps in a more expeditious manner, and perhaps his you know, he doesn't have to do the same amount of double checking and verification and so on. It's not to say that anyone is you know, superior to the other. I think they both have their value, and I think it's a question of what use your country wants, what your country wants out of that particular post, in terms, and that should dictate, you know, the nature of the diplomat that they should appoint.
And I'm glad you mentioned that, and you did correct me that you were not the Deputy General for the OAS, but what is a fact is that you are the son of outstanding stalwart in the PPP, your father Boise, and your brother, who is also a very accomplished politician. Are you in that, before I get onto the ambassador position, are you in that political realm as well?
I have never been in active politics as such, apart from being a diplomat, and I have never been a card-carrying member of any political movement in Guyana. But I think that my family has been identified quite closely with the PPP for a very long time. But I have not been, to answer your question, no, I've not been really politically involved as such, not in the sense of being an activist.
But you're growing up in Bel Air next to the residence of Dr. Jagan. You must have gone and played with, you know, in his yard and run around. Your dad is there. You go and the regular visitor in Dr. Jagan's place. Is that part of your growing up?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, Ambassador, so we talk about the political appointee and the career ambassadors or diplomats, so to speak. And you did mention that in the US, there is some specific posts around the world that is political appointees. In the Caribbean, how frequent are political appointees of diplomats within CARICOM?
It's extremely common.
Common, okay. And you think Guyana have a too large a percentage of political appointees, or are we a balance? And in your opinion?
I think right now we have a mix. You know, I would not wish to venture an opinion as to, you know, whether it's skewed one way or the other, because you know, and I think there are a number of there might be a number of posts that are also vacant at the moment. I haven't been following it too closely, but I know that we do have career diplomats in some very important posts, and and we do have some political appointees as well.
So, which position of the ambassadorship of Guyana would be the most senior one, or the most influential ambassador? Would that be the ambassador to the United States?
Well, you know, that's a common way of looking at it. I think that members of the public tend to see things in you know, having regard to the importance of a particular capital. I myself have never quite seen it that way, because I think that each post has its own importance. And even though a country might appear to be small, or you know, not as powerful or as influential as another country, it doesn't mean that that post is necessarily of less importance. Take the case of Suriname, which is a very small country, smaller than we are, smaller population, but we have a territorial claim. They have a territorial claim against us, among other factors in the relationship, people-to-people contacts, and so on. We have, I think, about 50,000 people living in Suriname, and that's just an example of how a country that can be small, a capital might not appear to be so prestigious, but it does not mean that the post is not important. So I myself have never looked at it that way in terms of, you know, I think people tend to attach to the post the sort of the glitter or the influence of the country that one is posted to. But you know, I don't think that it's as important a factor as people make it out to be.
But when someone is appointed ambassador to Washington, that is where the real powerhouse is, isn't that so? With world politics, everything kind of transcends in Washington, and you being there, you're part of the action.
Well, the post in Washington is important for a number of reasons. First of all, the United States is an enormously important country. The United States exercises an outsized influence on every country in the world, especially, I think, countries within the hemisphere. So that's one thing. In addition to that, in Washington, there are a number of important financial institutions are headquartered. For example, the World Bank, the IMF, the IDB, and so on. And these are institutions that Guyana has relations with, very important relations. In addition to that, and I think you alluded to this a little earlier, is that in Washington is also headquartered the Organization of American States. It's a very important organization, and it groups the countries of the Americas, all except Cuba, and it has a number of very important pillars around which countries cooperate. So the Guyana representation in Washington, D.C. is actually two separate missions under one roof. You have the embassy to the United States, and you have simultaneously the permanent mission to the Organization of American States. So the head of mission in Washington fulfills a double role. On the one hand, he's the ambassador to the U.S., and then he's Guyana's representative to the OAS. The staff in the embassy are also accredited to both, have double accreditations. And this is common with the Caribbean. Most of the other Caribbean countries have two missions under one roof, one representative to both. Haiti and Suriname have separate missions. Those are the only two in CARICOM, at least back when I was serving. All of the other countries of the Americas that are represented in Washington have completely separate missions to the United States and to the OAS. Sometimes they're separate buildings, separate ambassadors, and so on. Coming back to your question about the importance of Washington, this is the reason for its importance. The United States is an enormously important country, and we really have two missions in Washington. There's a third reason, and that is that in the United States, Guyana has a number of consulates. You're probably aware of the very large consulate we have in New York City, and we do have others in Florida, California, Atlanta, and so on. So the embassy has a supervisory influence, a supervisory authority, I should say, over the work of the consulates. And why we have consulates is primarily because of the extent of our diaspora in the United States. So that the embassy is involved very integrally in the work that has to be done with the diaspora and diaspora communities, and ministering to diaspora issues. By itself, in the area where it operates, in the Washington, D.C., Virginia, Maryland area, the embassy takes care of that. And then with communities further afield in the United States, through the consulates, directly and through the consulates. So these are the reasons why the United States is, the mission to the United States is very important. But I would separate I would not attach the question of seniority or the label of seniority to any particular mission, because they're all important.
Yeah, thank you. So when Ambassador Ramdin was the OAS Assistant Secretary General, he was separate from the Ambassador of Suriname to Washington. Is that, if I get you right, you were saying Suriname had two separate, they had the ambassador to Washington plus Ambassador Ramdin was at the OAS.
Yeah, the Suriname has an embassy to the United States, and it has a permanent mission to the Organization of American States. And at the time I was serving in Washington, those were two separate people.
Okay.
Ambassador Ramdin was not one of those. He was employed within the Secretariat of the OAS. He used to be the Surinamese ambassador, and then he competed in the election to be elected as Assistant Secretary General of the OAS. He won that election, and so he went on to work with the OAS. But at that point, he was not the permanent representative of Suriname to the OAS.
Right.
That was that person.
And I think he wanted to be the Secretary General of OAS, and Suriname government did not support his candidacy during the same time as well. But that's a different story. Before I bring Dr. Rose in, Ambassador, I was informed by your cousin that the land that Dr. Jagan built his house was donated to him by your father. Is that correct?
No, it was. I can relate to you this story that has been recounted to me because I don't know if I'd been born at that time or if I was maybe just a toddler. The story is that you know, my father started as a stall holder in Stabroek Market. I think that was his first economic undertaking. He was also a conductor on the train. I'm not too clear which came first. But anyway, shortly after Cherry and my father went into politics, the story goes, my father was a very bad businessman, a very poor businessman, and he extended a great deal of credit to his political friends and others, which he was never able to collect. And so his debts ran up. And in order to bail himself out and keep his business in the market running, he kept going to his colleague, Dr. Jagan, who was earning money as a dentist at the time, and kept borrowing and borrowing to keep himself afloat. And there came a point in time when he was unable to repay a debt that had grown quite large. And at the time, he had inherited a piece of land in Bel Air from his father. And the only way he could repay Dr. Jagan was to give him a portion, or to recompense him with a portion of the land. So that's the story that I've grown up hearing.
Okay, thanks for the explanation. And I think your cousin will get the picture clearer now, because she texted me to say that was not what you just said. So I'm glad you cleared that up. Dr. Rose?
Yes, Ambassador Karran. Now, you have been ambassador for the past 20 odd years. The people of Guyana don't know much about you. Can you give us a background about yourself?
Well, I think Mr. Sugrim already did that.
No, I need it in depth, because the people in Guyana don't know you. You were in Washington, D.C. for how long? 20 odd years?
No, I was there for about 16 years.
And then you went to China for at least another 5 years?
4 years.
So 20 years you're out of the limelight in Guyana. People don't know you. The generation of today don't know anything about you.
So I was appointed to Venezuela in 1997, and that was the year before President Chavez assumed office. And I stayed 7 years in Venezuela. And the reason why I was appointed, I was told, was that the serving ambassador at the time, who was Minister Satydev Saw, was needed back in the agriculture ministry, and they wanted to keep the position filled. So I was at the time a practicing lawyer. I had my own law firm, Reese, Fitzpatrick and Karran. That firm is now headed by Timothy Jonas, who is a frequent guest on your program. So I left the firm ostensibly, initially, to cover the period until the government could find someone, and I just ended up remaining there to make a long story short. So I ended up staying 7 years, and then President Jack Dale appointed me to the United States. There were certain specifics that he asked me to do as my mission. One of them was to work with the multilateral financial institutions that is the World Bank, IMF, IDB, and so on. And the second thing was to work with the diaspora. Why the work with the multilateral financial institutions was important is because Guyana at the time was a highly indebted, poor country. You might remember that we had owed a foreign debt of in excess of $2 billion US, and Guyana was spending in the region of, I think, 94 cents on the dollar to service debt. So he asked me to pay particular attention to what was happening with the multilateral financial institutions in the area of debt relief and so on. Eventually, through President Jagdeo's efforts, we were able to make a stunning turnaround on the question of debt relief. He got the IDB to write off their debt of about $400 million, and that led to a cascade of debt write-offs that put us in quite a more comfortable economic position. When that was over, I remained in Washington. They were not moving people around. I think that there's quite a cost attached to moving diplomats around. So I ended up staying there a long time. And then subsequently in 2016, after the 2015 elections, President David Granger asked me if I would like to go to China. And the reason he gave was that he considered China to be a very important country. By then, I had been the most senior diplomat in the service, and he said that he wanted to send a message to the government of China that Guyana was sending its most experienced diplomat. So that's how I ended up in China. And then in 2020, I was recalled, and I've been back home since. Prior to my diplomatic appointments, I practiced law for 12 years, 5 of the latter 12 with the law firm I just mentioned. And prior to that, as I said a little earlier, I used to be in broadcasting, in radio broadcasting. Guyana had no television at that time. And in any event, I probably was not good looking enough for TV.
Now, what school you attended? QC?
Yes.
Okay, you're Queen's College. Okay. Now, Ambassador, you did mention, my colleague asked you the question, if political appointments are just as important as having real ambassadors. But don't you think some countries demand real diplomats to become ambassadors?
Well, I've never heard any country, any receiving state insist that that the representative being sent must be a career person. I think that countries respect the choice of a representative of other countries with which they have diplomatic relations. If they do have some kind of a reservation about a particular appointment, there are ways in which they would signal that without any kind of they would delay the request and things of that nature to send a message. But I've never heard a country insist that the representative be a career diplomat. And I notice your choice of language. You're saying to send a real diplomat. Whether one is career or one is one is political, like I said earlier, I think they both have their strong points. Political appointee is no less legitimate than a career appointee. He's not a person, he or she is not a person who has come through the system. But it does not necessarily mean that such a person is less effective, or for that matter, more effective than a career diplomat.
Ambassador, Guyana has high commissioners. I know that's for the Commonwealth. Guyana has ambassadors, non-Commonwealth countries. But I don't know our audience understand the difference between the two. Can you explain to our audience why we have an High Commissioner in Canada or in India or in South Africa, and why we have ambassadors like in China and in England and in the United States and so forth?
Yes, well, a large number of countries in the world are former colonies of Britain and members of the former British Empire, Guyana included. So there is really no difference between a high commissioner and an ambassador in terms of their functions or in terms of their authority. It is simply a term that has come out of the British system. If a head of mission from one, from a Commonwealth country, and a Commonwealth country is a country that is a former colony of Britain, like Guyana. So if a head of mission from a Commonwealth country is accredited to another Commonwealth country, such a person is called a High Commissioner. If you're accredited to any other country, you're called an ambassador. That's the only difference. You have the same scope of functions, the same privileges, and the same salary for that matter.
Many Guyanese and many people around the world also believe that ambassadors are given post jobs, they got everything and so forth, and all they do is to sign passport forms or affidavits or something. Can you tell us your role as an ambassador when you're in Washington, D.C.? And that's the general perception of people. Ambassadors, they got cushy jobs, they do nothing, just sign passport forms or affidavits, and that's about all.
Well, first of all, the question of the the immunities and privileges and so on that heads of mission have, this has very, very ancient roots. It goes back to the time when in the world, certainly in the Western world, you had city-states was the form of organization. And so just like nowadays, back then, you would have the leaders of these city-states. They would need to trade, they would need to build alliances, they would have enemies, and so on. But if the leader of one city-state is traversing, is leaving the confines of his domain to go to visit his friend, 3 villages down, well, on the way he could very likely have his head lopped off or something. So, arising from those times, you had practices developing surrounding the immunities of heads of state, of principalities. And nowadays, when you hear that an ambassador is someone who cannot be charged for a crime by the other government, or you drive in special cars and whatnot, all of this is a hand down from those ancient practices, and it is because you are in another country representing your head of state. So you are accorded certain rights and privileges. You're the representative of your head of state. As to the workload, I would certainly beg to differ. That you don't do much work. Diplomats nowadays have to be you have to have a range of skills. You have to be able to negotiate. You have to be able to communicate. You have to have an eye for cross-cultural nuances and differences. You have to be attuned to your capital, to the way the country, the receiving country does business, because it differs from capital to capital. And you actually spend more hours working than someone who has a regular desk job, because You have to do a regular 8 to 4 job at your desk in your mission, including administrative duties, by the way. And then you have to be working at night, attending receptions, events, and this sort of thing. You may be operating in a different time zone, so that your headquarters is making demands of responses when it's not when you ought to be sleeping. You ask about Washington, and I said earlier that in Washington there was the Organization of American States, and then you're also credited to the United States. Well, the Organization of American States, the reason why countries have completely separate missions to that body is because of the workload. Is because the cycle of meetings that you have to attend, the number of different committees, that calls for a full-time staff. So when you have to attend to that, and then you have to do the bilateral work with the United States, and then you have to attend to diaspora affairs, it's quite a heavy workload, and you easily end up doing 14-hour days or sometimes 16-hour days at work. Just take, for example, the diaspora. As soon as the weather starts to get warm in the United States, the ambassador can expect to be invited to diaspora engagements. Typically, you have numerous organizations, diaspora organizations. You probably know this better than I do. And they would have activities that they would like you to attend. And it's important for the embassy to play a role in these events. I mean, if the ambassador shows up, these organizations would typically have, let us say, an annual fundraiser. You show up and you give a speech. Well, they might sell an extra 20 or 30 tickets or something. It's important to lend your support to these things. So I say all that to say that that for the head of mission in the United States, every weekend, as long as the weather gets warm, you are invited out to some diaspora activity, either around the Washington area or further afield. So just imagine that, added on to your regular workload, your office work and meeting cycles and so on. That's just an example. So it's not, it's a job that has a certain cachet to it. It has a certain glitter, I suppose, attached to it. But it's not that it's very little work, and it's not easy work either.
Ambassadors are given diplomatic immunity. It means that if you commit a crime in a country, you cannot be charged. You might have to leave the country and go back to your home country and so forth. But does that immunity extend to your wife, to your children, and so forth?
Yes.
Okay. So everyone in the family gets who else in the embassy gets diplomatic immunity?
All diplomats have immunity. As long as you are a diplomat, that is, you carry a diplomatic passport, you have been appointed a diplomat, you have some level of immunity.
Can you tell our listeners, if you know it, the code of conduct for diplomats in foreign countries?
Well, there's the Vienna Convention,
right.
that is signed onto by all the countries, and
197 countries, I should say.
Yeah, and that regulates it. But the thing about diplomatic immunity is that it is not a carte blanche to do anything. You are expected to comport yourself in a certain manner. You're expected to obey the laws of the country. And in some instances, countries do apply the law against diplomats. But there are certain activities in which they cannot, they cannot prosecute you. A good example of that is if you are transiting a country on official diplomatic business, you cannot be interfered with. Your luggage ought not to be searched, and so forth. But in the United States, for example, diplomats who commit infractions with traffic regulations, they're given tickets or whatever.
But they don't pay the tickets, though. Washington, D.C. pays the tickets. The State Department pays the tickets.
No, there used to be a time when there was quite a scandalous situation with some permanent missions to the United Nations, that is in New York, not paying tickets. That was a long time ago. In Washington, certainly when I was there, the measures were taken to enforce payment of tickets.
Okay. Charles? Charles?
Yeah, Ambassador, I'm glad you mentioned some of the things that we cleared up there, but are there different tiers in ambassadorship, like there's tier 1, tier 2, tier 3?
No, there are not any tiers, but in some professions, like like the legal profession as well. Similarly, in diplomatic corps, seniority counts for a lot. So if you have presented credentials before someone else has, in the seating arrangements at gatherings of that state, you'd be seated in a higher priority. There's always also the dean of the diplomatic corps, and that figure is expected to be a sort of interlocutor on the part of the diplomatic corps with the host government. So if you have issues, especially certain administrative issues that might affect the diplomatic corps as a body, the dean is the person who would be expected to make representation to the host government. The dean is usually selected by seniority. Automatically, the most senior diplomat, the one who has been in position longest, becomes the dean. Except that in Latin America, the papal nuncio, the representative of the Vatican, is the dean of the diplomatic corps, regardless of his seniority.
So were you a dean at the Washington?
No, I made it up to about number 4 or 5.
That's high.
Okay, Ambassador, when you were in Washington, were you ever what term to use when you were asked by the State Department to report to the State Department? Were you ever called?
Present your credentials?
No, not your credentials. For a matter of interest.
Yes,
were you ever summoned to the State Department?
Yes, I was. Yes.
On matters of Guyana, of course.
Yes.
After ambassador leaves office, is there a retirement plan for them from the government?
Well, an ambassador is a civil servant, and when you leave the service, you get whatever you're entitled to from your civil service entitlements.
And that's based on the ambassador's salary, or that's based on the civil service salary?
On your civil service salary.
Oh, okay. When ambassadors receive gifts from the country which they're operating from, is that gift of the ambassador, or is that gift for the country that they represent? And what happened to the gift when the ambassador leaves?
Well, it's a gift for the country, because you will receive that gift in your professional capacity. So it's not your personal gift. We have legislation here in Guyana that governs that. I think if something is more than 50, the equivalent of $50 US or something like that, you have to declare it. But it ought to be at least offered to the government of Guyana, or left in your mission when you leave.
Mr. Ambassador, when Dr. Rose asked you about what determines the rules and conduct of an ambassador or a diplomat, recently Guyana have had I don't know if you listened to the recording of one of our ambassador or high commissioner. Was that conduct acceptable behavior?
Well, I don't know that I did hear I saw the video, and I don't think it was acceptable whether the individual was a diplomat or not. But certainly a high level of conduct is expected from someone who holds a diplomatic rank, serving as a diplomat abroad. And I think that the correct decision was made to recall the individual. And I think I just find it surprising that he had to be asked, to demit office.
In your 20-odd years of being a diplomat to represent Guyana, has this ever happened in your working life? Has any diplomat was compromised, like in that situation that you experienced?
Well, there have been instances where diplomats have done some pretty awful things, but none from Guyana.
Oh, okay. Mr. Ambassador, with all the skill set that you have, you are alumni from Queen's College, our top school in Guyana. You're an accomplished attorney. You're a very successful ambassador. You're still a young man. I'm sure retirement is not part of your DNA. What are you doing post ambassadorship?
I'm working right now in the oil industry as an advisor to one of the oil companies, CNOC. I work as basically I advise on government relations and corporate social responsibility.
Oh, so you do work? You still work there?
I am working mostly with one particular company, and I have other interests as well.
Okay, and I'm glad you mentioned that. I didn't realize that you were working with the oil companies. So let's talk a little about the contract. the PSA, the production sharing agreement. Is there any sunset clause in your view as an attorney? Is there a sunset clause in this current PSA?
To be honest with you, I have not studied. My engagement in the industry is not on the production side or on the the operational side at all. It's purely more in the nature of public relations, and so I've not perused the contract in that detail. I'm answering you very honestly. I simply do not know the answer to the question you're asking.
Okay. How long did you start working with Sono?
About 2 years.
It seems, Ambassador, that I think Ambassador Hunt, the U.S. ambassador, when he retired, I believe, or his stint was over, he went and worked with the gold industry in Guyana. So is that a normal progression for ambassador to move from ambassadorship into the mineral fields or the natural field?
Well, I think that diplomacy nowadays is taking on more and more more and more of a relationship with economics. We hear about economic diplomacy, which is the trying to advance relations in the economic field. And so I think that ambassadors nowadays, in many posts, have to do a great deal of work in the field of economics, and so it's probably a natural step for persons who have been diplomats and who spend a great deal of time trying to promote investments and try to increase trade and negotiate trade agreements and things of that nature. It's sort of an easy slide over, I think.
You mentioned that you came back. Your last posting was in China, and when you were in China, you were also accredited to Pakistan, I believe. And you were recalled, or you just decided that was the end of it?
No, the government indicated that when my contract came to an end, they would not be interested in renewing it.
That was the coalition government or the current government?
The coalition government.
But it did that also. We had Ambassador Shamir Ali on the program some time ago, and he also mentioned the same, the same thing you just said. Why was that? What was that the mindset of the coalition that they were not renewing contracts? Any reason why?
Well, you will have to ask the coalition. But there were about 6 heads of mission were removed at the same time. Shamir, myself, and a set of others.
Interesting. Were you offered any new position with the new administration?
No.
Did you approach them that you're available?
No, I haven't. No.
But if you were offered an ambassador position up with the current government, would you take it?
Well, you're asking me and in front of the whole country to answer a question like that.
Yeah, because you've been a very accomplished ambassador, Mr. Ambassador. So,
well, the thing is that that it's not a yes or no question. Right now I'm resettled in Guyana. I'm very happy living in Guyana. I've been away for a very long time, and now I'm really reconnecting and enjoying all of the things that any Guyanese would miss for a very long time. So I do not really wish to leave. Having said that, if I am called, and these things are normally done at a very high level, and so one would have to give due consideration if that were to happen. But I do not expect it to happen anyway. So,
because you did mention many ambassador positions is still not filled, but Mr. Ambassador, your first stint was in Venezuela, and as you know, recently the matter in the World Court came up. You spent from 1997 to 2003 in Venezuela. Were you asked by the government to be a part of that team to go up to The Hague to present our case to the World Court?
No.
How is your relationship with your fellow ambassadors who have retired?
Excellent.
They're all in Guyana, or they're different parts of the world?
Some are here, some are elsewhere.
Okay. And what about the ambassadors from other countries that you were associated with?
Well, a lot of those bonds have been loosened, because although Guyana has tended to keep its diplomats in position for a long time, other countries rotate a little more regularly, so you don't often have the time to make. It's not a kind of a job where you have the opportunity to make lasting bonds very easily. It does happen, but I would not say it happens very often.
Okay, Dr. Rose.
Ambassador, you were in Washington, D.C., you said, for 16 years. Were you ever called in by the State Department and read the riot act on a stance taken by Guyana that the Americans did not like?
I recall that I was called in once, but it was not. It was over more domestic developments than foreign policy.
In Guyana?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, you've been in D.C. You said that your activities sometimes expanded towards the weekend because the diaspora always have some and so forth. But you were in China for 4 years. China has very few Guyanese, so there's no diaspora in China. So what did you do how do you spend your time in China as ambassador? What was your function, seeing that you had already weekend functions there?
Dr. Rose, I don't wish to my description of the diaspora work to come over as having been some sort of a complaint. I was just simply
No. I understand.
describing
I understand.
the extent of the work. In China, we do have some Guyanese. We had at the time about 100 students. And they were scattered through several provinces in China. The demands of the student contingent in China was such that the government eventually found it expedient to actually appoint a student affairs officer who was sort of employed by the Public Service Ministry, which administers scholarships, rather than being employed by the Foreign Ministry, but working under the umbrella of the embassy. So that gives you an idea that there was some work with Guyanese nationals. But China, how the time went, you have a lot of a diplomat always has a lot of work to do. Sometimes your work is requested of you, is given to you. You're given assignments from headquarters, or you can use your own initiative to fill the time. How it works is that you do a work plan, an annual work plan, and then you have to state what are your initiatives and how you're going to execute them, and how you're going to apportion the funding that your mission is going to receive towards these various activities. And then there are quarterly reports you have to fill out, showing your progress and showing your expenditure and so on. And if you're falling short, well, it will have implications, because you could receive less money for that line item the following year, or you have to account for why you have not fulfilled this or that particular aspect of the program. So you have to work to a plan, and that plan would have all the areas that you have set out in conjunction with headquarters that you are going to execute. This is what the policy of the ministry would dictate, what areas you should focus on, and you would recommend how you intend to go about accomplishing that. So there is always work to do. You have your reporting responsibilities, your research, pushing business, and so on. The characteristic of a country like China, which has such an ancient history, is that the method of engaging with foreign diplomats is they're very experienced. and they tend to have very established, long established practices, sometimes going back centuries. So the nature of your engagement is sort of worked out, and and this makes it in a way, more uniform and easier to get things done. In China, because of the nature of the economic relationship between the two countries, a lot of effort, more so than other posts, would be utilized in trying to develop trade and business and so on, investments and things of that nature. The Chinese provinces, there are 23 provinces in China and a number of other zones, and they had very active programs for diplomats where they would engage you, take you to their areas and show you the developments and get you interested in doing business with their companies and their regions and so on. There is you never have a lot of time to spare. And if you're in a country where the English is not the
first language,
not the native language, it's a good idea to spend some time trying to acquaint yourself with that language as well.
Mr. Ambassador, you have been there for 20 plus years. You have been an accomplished diplomat. What advice you'll give to our young diplomats aspiring to become ambassadors today?
Read, and read.
That's all?
Well, the thing is that Guyana is positioned to be a very affluent country in the near future. And this is going to have enormous implications for our foreign relations and for our foreign policy establishment. It's difficult for us to foresee some of the changes that are going to be coming, but they're going to be very profound changes, no doubt. We now have 2 FPSOs, and we have, I think by the end of the year, the figure is that we're going to have, or will have earned about $1 billion from the oil industry. So there's going to come a time when we're going to have 10 FPSOs, and you can imagine the wealth. So there are, barring anything unforeseen, what can we expect to happen economically, and what can we expect to happen in the impact of those economic developments are going to have on foreign policy. So we have a natural resources fund, and that fund is going to accumulate. We probably already, the country has capacity problems in terms of spending. So imagine what's going to happen when your reserves mushroom. We have a local content system in place. This is going to lead to the growth and development of Guyanese companies, barring anything unforeseen, in terms of capital, in terms of technology, and so on. So where is all this going to lead us? We can very well envisage a point in time when Guyana is going to, a lot of paradigms are going to be shifted. Just around here in the CARICOM region, for example, and this is how foreign policy works. You exercise, you expand influence in your own neighborhood before you go further afield. So we can expect, for example, that we would attract skills and resources from CARICOM countries, both skilled and unskilled labor. This is going to change the whole dynamic that it currently exists between Guyana and the countries of CARICOM. We can expect to be looked upon for more leadership of the region. It's already happening. We see what's happening with agriculture. We see what's happening with climate change and so on. So we will become a much more influential country. Beyond CARICOM, we have the Inter-American system. We were just talking about the OAS. So the countries of the Americas all have a network of agreements and so on that compel them to cooperate in strengthening democracy, in promoting integral development, in combating insecurity, and in promoting human rights. This is a very, very, a pretty strong system. A country like Guyana, with the amount of wealth that we expect to generate, one would expect that other countries would begin listening to you a little more closely when you speak. You have more resources to throw around and so on. So as wealth grows, if it does in the manner expected, we can envisage the day when Guyana becomes, for example, a net donor of aid rather than a net recipient of aid. We can extrapolate a little more if we want to feel excited, and envisage the time when Guyanese businesses can go abroad as investors in other countries, in just the same way that you have Trinidadians and Jamaicans and so on investing here in Guyana now. So it's, what I'm saying is a little counterintuitive, but it's all within the realm of possibility. I mean, the topic of your program is foreign policy in the 21st century. These are things that we can expect. The Natural Resources Fund, if you amass a set of wealth, well, then you're in a position to invest, as other oil funds of other countries do, with very, very, very desirable results. So we can be investing in other hedge funds and so forth. We can become an exporter of capital. Now, all of these developments are going to have enormous implications for the foreign policy sector and for the diplomats at that time. So to your question about what should the advice be for diplomats, we're poised to go into uncharted waters, and we are poised to have to develop a core of diplomats, unlike the present bunch. I mean, what we should be looking at is really training and experience of a new breed of diplomats, a new core of diplomats. It takes years to refashion and repurpose a foreign policy establishment, like any other branch of government, really. And so to a young diplomat who's asking what to do, the answer should be, well, you have to look at the trends and see how you want to position yourself in terms of what areas you're going to focus on and how you're going to have yourself taught to get there.
Mr. Ambassador, the Middle East have been expanding its influence outwardly now, and they've become very powerful, especially because of the oil wealth. Now, on a per capita basis, exports have said that Guyana is about the number 3rd country in oil production, 10 plus billion barrels of oil. Now, do you think we should establish stronger diplomatic ties in the Middle East with more countries? We're now in Qatar, no, Kuwait. Do you think we should have an embassy in Dubai or in Saudi Arabia or something?
Well, as an oil-producing country, it would certainly be desirable to have relations with other oil-producing countries, and we would need the oil industry is not a homogeneous sector, so we would need to see where there are what particular countries we need to have particular relations with. So yes, I would say that we ought to expand our representation with oil-producing countries, but not only with oil-producing countries. We have very little, relatively little diplomatic representation in Africa, very relatively little in Asia. Even in Europe and the Americas, I think we're underrepresented, and we ought to increase that, I think.
Okay. Given the fact that we have OPEC, and you are an advisor to which oil company again?
CNOOC.
Do you think Ghana should join OPEC? Now, let me put a caveat here. As an underdeveloped country, Ghana joins OPEC. OPEC orders a cutback. Ghana don't have to fall within the cutback and ask for an exemption. Venezuela did it earlier period of time. Trinidad did it earlier period of time, and so forth. So a lot of people believe that if you join OPEC and they ask for a cutback or reduction of production, we'll be losing money. That's not the case. They're exempted status for some countries. Do you think we should join OPEC?
Well, I don't know that is the only factor that one would need to consider in terms of deciding on making a decision on whether we should have membership in OPEC. I think to some extent OPEC is also a political organization, or certainly there are political influences in that organization. I simply am not aware of all of the nuances to be able to say yes, whether we should or whether we should not. The countries that are members, they certainly obviously derive some kind of a benefit. But there are a number of things we have to look at. For example, in many of these organizations, international organizations, the larger, more influential countries tend to dominate, and that's another aspect that we would need to look at. So it's difficult for me to answer you with a yes or no. But I would observe that I have not heard any of our leading policymakers, the president or anyone else, say that pronounce on the desirability or otherwise of joining OPEC.
Given the rise of Guyana's prominence with oil, and I've been looking at this recently, do you think we need a stronger voice at the United Nations? Especially in the Assembly, General Assembly?
A strengthened voice at the United Nations is never a bad thing, because the United Nations is the most important, international organization in the world. But if I'm to understand the policies of the government, it is really focused in a more practical direction. It is really to use the incoming wealth to defeat or to ameliorate some of the problems that we have, the impediments to development, if I should put it that way. For example, the poverty, the lack of infrastructure, lack of communications, the gap between the coast and hinterland in terms of development, and things of that nature, energy costs and whatnot. So the idea is to use the wealth to transition, to ameliorate those problems, so as to put Guyana in a position where it is on the path to prosperity and stability. And by the way, this is nothing new. I mean, we as a country already pretty much decided that this is what we're going to do way back since I think the days of the National Development Strategy, which was first promulgated, I think, in the year 2000. It is just that now we have the wherewithal to do this in probably a more effective and quicker manner. I say all of this to say that that this is the kind of focus, and foreign policy is an extension of domestic policy, and these are the core objectives, really. To use the wealth in a specific manner to develop other industries, so that we start exporting more agriculture and minerals and so on. So representation abroad is really a means toward accomplishing and reinforcing these kinds of developments. So the question of whether we have more representation in other countries, whether we have a stronger voice at the United Nations, is all geared toward building alliances, building understanding, getting cooperation to fulfill the domestic agenda that becomes the international agenda. So I think you have to look at it in a more kind of holistic kind of way.
President Ali has said that he intends to take Guyana to new heights never reached before. And I agree with him, and I support that. But the question is, vis-a-vis other countries, this has to be done through the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, because the Ministry of Foreign Affairs are the eyes and ears of Guyana. And that's the only ministry can advance Guyana's image and reputation abroad. So in this sense, what would you say to the government as how to strengthen the Ministry of Foreign Affairs?
Well, I think we already touched on that. I think you have to, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and not only the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but a number of other ministries in the government would have to anticipate what's coming in terms of the rapid economic development and how that is going to impact the economy, the society, and foreign relations, and those adjustments need to be made. I was making the case a little earlier for diplomats to have a different kind of focus. You're going to have, for example, it might be desirable, it might be necessary for missions to be equipped with specific personnel to deal with economic diplomacy. It would require, I think, some kind of a different kind of training. The day is probably already here when captains of industry, entrepreneurs, CEOs from companies should be involved in the training of diplomats, so that they have they come with this kind of a knowledge and background to their job. We've had attempts at that in the past. We've had economic attachés and so on here at home and abroad. I think this needs to be expanded. taking into account the needs, the availability of resources, and the and what we anticipate is going to happen.
Mr. Ambassador, before I let my colleague comes in, I want to say this. Your answers are very, very specific, excellent. And this tells me that you are the prime candidate to be the High Commissioner to India. Even though you said you want to return as settling here, you are the prime candidate to be the ambassador to India. Charles?
Mr. Ambassador, and I second that too. When we mentioned OPEC, and I'm glad Dr. Rose talked about it, I think Venezuela is part of OPEC, if I'm correct.
Yes, yeah.
Wouldn't the border issue we have with Venezuela, Guyana being a part of OPEC, they will put additional pressure on Venezuela to conform? I know they matters before the World Court, but we need to work in every angle whatsoever. So being part of OPEC, that's putting additional, well, not pressure, but at least to nuance to work with Venezuela to get that thing settled in a very friendly manner rather than military manner. What is your views on that?
Well, you've made a number of assumptions there. First of all, Guyana and Venezuela share membership in a number of international organizations, a number of regional organizations. And it has never been the case that membership in those bodies has really impacted the territorial controversy. Secondly, there has always been a sense in Guyana, I think, that we needed, this is historically, that we needed to consign the territorial controversy into a special mechanism, as we had, for example, those instruments under the Geneva Agreement, the mixed commission, and then the good officer process, and so on. And the reason for that is, as the weaker power, it was in our favor to hive that whole issue off into a separate orbit by itself, so that the rest of the bilateral relationship could continue in some fashion of normality, as normal as possible as it could be. So I don't know that we want to go into other organizations that are not concerned
for the purpose, okay.
Yeah, for the purpose of picking a fight.
I got that.
They're bigger than we are.
Okay.
Yeah.
Talking about the foreign policy in the 21st century, and you mentioned quite a bit, as Dr. Rose said, you eloquently present some great ideas. If Guyana is to be the hub of South America and part of maybe Africa and connection with CARICOM and so on, what do you recommend, Mr. Ambassador, that Guyana need to do? And I guess we have to do quite a lot to be that hub, that influence, that important destination to connect South America with the Caribbean, with Africa, and so on. What do we need to do? If that's a possibility.
In one word, probably infrastructure. I don't think that we lack the will. We have always seen ourselves as a bridge between the Caribbean and Latin America, and with good reason, because we are a country, we're a Caribbean people, but we have a very strong Amazonian dimension. We're an Amazonian country as well. So we're a natural bridge. What we lack is infrastructure. We don't have the airline connectivity. We don't have the shipping routes. We don't have the way with the modern communications and so on. So I think we can expect that that as these things develop, we will sort of occupy our natural slot in that regard.
And I'm glad you mentioned that, Ambassador, because even in 1997, when you started your ambassadorial duty, I was supporting the United Force then, Mansour Nadir. And even at that time, with Highway to Happiness from Peter Digar, we were looking at a roughly $5 billion a year for Guyana to leapfrog into the future. Now we have that opportunity with the oil and gas sector. You are with Sunuk, but we are getting the crumbs basically. I know it's a lot of money, but if we were to get $5 to $6 billion a year, that will leapfrog our infrastructural development. I mean, you live here in the United States, Mr. Ambassador. Everywhere you drive in the United States, there's a network of road. You go to Long Island, there's a network. You go upstate, you want to cross anywhere. I live in Queens Village. There's a network of road all over the place. In Guyana, we really lack that. So I'm asking you as a member of SINOC and an advisor, push Guyana's case. Let's get some more revenue from the oil sector. I know the contract is the contract and the government seems reluctant to renegotiate any part of it. But I really believe if we can get $5 billion a year from our oil revenue and Guyana to be the hub of that network from Africa to Latin America to the Caribbean, we need that infrastructure. We need, training of our people. We need all these things, and the funds are there, the resources there. But we seem to have the short change of the stick. Mr. Ambassador, please use your position to ensure that push Guyana's need so that we can get a fair share of our resource for the development of our country.
Well, that doesn't accord with my job description at all. But but let me say that money is not the. I don't think that money is the problem or that money is going to solve the problem. That infrastructure that you talk about in the United States, it was not because they had money that it was built. That's not the only factor. These things take many years to develop. You have the question of capacity to spend, which is a problem that we already have in this country. So I don't see that $5 billion or more dollars is going to hasten the development of infrastructure. These things have their own processes. I don't think that money is the problem here. And as regards the contract, I mean, the government has a position on it. I think you probably have government leaders on this program very frequently who have already addressed that question. There's no need for me to. So, I think that the infrastructural development is on its way. It is going to take the time that it needs to take. But I think that we can be optimistic that at some point we're going to get where we all want to be.
So, Ambassador, time is running out on us. We really want to thank you so much for being a part of our program. I know at the beginning you said there's so long a program, but the time has now come in, and we still have a lot of questions for you. We hope you can come back sometime in the future so we can continue the discussion. Anything, Ambassador, in closing tonight?
Well, I think that foreign policy is an extremely important issue, and I want to commend you for bringing it out into the public domain and shedding some light on it. I think that developing foreign policy, cultivating external relations is no less important than pumping oil out of the seabed. It might be less visible, but it's no less important, and it's quite crucial. And so having a foreign service that is focused, that is motivated, and that is active is very important. I think that we stand on very good shoulders. Guyana is a country that has always punched above its weight in foreign policy, going all the way back to Forbes. You can remember the seminal role Guyana played in the non-aligned movement at the time, our role in the movement against apartheid. Under Cherry, he was so passionate about poverty. His new global human order was eventually adopted by one of the committees in the United Nations, no less. And then we had, of course, President Jack Davis, with his forest carbon initiatives and so on. So Guyana has always been there. President Jack Davis received an award for that. We had a stunning development the other day where we became the first country to be paid for carbon credits. This is an awesome development. It's a pioneering. So we can see we have a new president, young, 2 years old into the presidency. And already we can see a sort of dynamism. We can see an openness that he brings to the game. He's not afraid to speak his mind in the councils of the world. And one can very well anticipate Guyana being, taking a leadership position in the world in issues like climate change, food policy, energy policy, and things of this nature. And so we need to have the foreign policy establishment to back all of that up. And I hope that the effort is made to make that happen.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Before Dr. Rose gives a final statement, one last question, Ambassador. If you were to do it all over again, will you follow the footsteps of your dad and your brother in politics, or you stay in diplomacy?
No, I would prefer to be a diplomat. My father spent a lot of time away from home because of his political commitments, and I would prefer to do things do things the way I did it, and not to take away from his calling and the contributions he made to the country, but at a personal level, it would not be something I would choose.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Dr. Rose, anything in closing?
Yes, I again will call for an increase in salary for public servants, police, teachers, nurses, etc. And the retirement age should be increased from 55 to 62. But at the same time, and I support what the ambassador said. President Ali is a very, very practical president. He is our 21st century president. And I'm calling on all Guyanese, regardless of race, ethnicity, or party affiliation, to support his One Guyana's vision and his 1,000 men program. These, examine them, they're good. Don't stay from the outside and criticize them. Join the team. And if you want to make the changes from within. But it's about time we put behind us. I'm an Indo-Guyanese, I'm an Afro-Guyanese. Do like Trinidadians. They always tell you I'm a Trini. Jamaicans, I'm from Yard, I'm a Jamaican. We have to say we're Guyanese. Forget about the race. Let us put country first as Guyanese, one people, one nation, striving for one destiny. Guyanese, Guyanese, Guyanese. Not Indo-Guyanese, Amerindian or Native or Afro-Guyanese. Get rid of those terms. It's only served to divide us. Let us support President Ali's One Guyana initiative and his 1,000 men program. Thank you.
Thank you, and I fully concur, Dr. Rose. And thank you, Mr. Ambassador, for spending the evening with us. To all our audience out there, thank you to Noah and to Devin. Good night. God bless our great country of Guyana.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. You did a fantastic job tonight.